Barnes-Hecker mine disaster, my wife's great-grandpa was killed at the Stevenson mine. Same year as the Barnes-Hecker. And when I used to talk about this event, like when I was doing federal mine, doing MSHA training for the miners, I talked about my wife's grandpa, great-grandpa getting killed, and then about the Barnes-Hecker because it happened in the same year. And I talked about it from a personal standpoint about how what happened. Because I know what happened. I heard the stories because my wife's grandpa told me all of it. Told me what happened, how he got crushed, and how he was killed on surface, and how he had to go. And back then, the other thing that happened is that this is the horror of it. You talk about, and it was just the way society was. Your body wasn't brought to the costly funeral home. It wasn't brought to the emergency room down at Bell or at the Market General here. They shipped your body home. And I worked with one of the old timers that I worked with. I say old timers, no, I'm one of them. But I remember when I first started in the mine, there was one of the guys, a Finnish guy that was there, and I'm not going to say his name, but he was telling me that when he was a little boy, he says, when I was a little boy, and I'm thinking, boy, it could have been a long time ago, but he was telling me this, he says he was home with his grandma when his grandpa got killed. And he says he remembers, I was in the kitchen with my grandma, and they carried my grandpa's body into the kitchen and put him on the floor. And he was covered in iron ore and blood. And they left. He says, and that vision is in my mind my whole life of my dead grandpa laying on the kitchen floor in his work clothes. And that's what actually happened here. And that's why when you hear the stories, that's why I had to tell the story of Wepsala, and the other guy here that got whose head was taken off is the young guy, 18 years old. He'd only been there a couple of months. And but you don't hear those stories. You don't hear say, oh yeah, somebody was killed in mine. Okay, big deal. Big deal. These guys were ripped apart. Their bodies were torn apart, and then the ones that bodies were found, the pieces were sent to the families. And so it's like that's how it was. You're right. It's a real statement about what was going on. Not only here in the Iron Ore Mines, but nationwide. A lot of people don't realize that. They don't realize, they don't study the history. We forget what history we had, and then we relive that history. And one of the things that, and I know right now, one of the big things that we talk about here from a political standpoint is immigration. And that was the biggest issue back in the 19-teens and into the early 1920s. Immigration was the top issue. And people from, but they needed these people because nobody's going to take these jobs. You're going to dead. You got to sign an agreement that it's a trade risk. If you get killed, it's your fault. But what are you going to do? And so all these Italians, Finnish people, Swedish people, and other people that were coming here, they could come and they could get off. They could come into New York, get on a train, and come to, and 2 days later, you got a job. Your work, but you didn't always get that job because here's another story I'll tell you about. Where I grew up in Nagani was the Queen Mine location, which was we were surrounded by caving grounds and old mines and stuff. And the people that lived there were, the little location I lived in was all Italian immigrants, all old ex-miners. There wasn't one of them that had 10 fingers. They all had like 9 fingers, 8 fingers, because they had fingers cut off when they were working. And it was always funny because they'd always tease me, Jimmy, go here, cut your finger off. It was just like that. So they were real funny. They were just a great bunch of people. But Arturo Paulini, who lived across the street from me, told me that when he first came here, he was going to get a job at the Queen's Mine, which was just down below the hill. Like I say, lived on the Queen Mine location on Queen Road. And he said, what you did was to get a job, you went and stood in line. He said you went down there, he says, and you'd stand in line, and as a miner was taken up, whether they were killed or seriously injured, next miner went down underground. He says, and that's how they did it. He says, and so you stood in line. He says, I remember at in the warehouse they had wooden caskets in the warehouse. I'm thinking.
I think to sum it up, it's colonialism, pure and simple. The tremendous wealth that was generated from the mines of the Lake Superior region left here, never to return. Yeah. Carnegie and Rockefeller didn't build their banks in Duluth. Yeah. Tremendous wealth was generated here. It left, and now we're all left high and dry, particularly in the areas where the mines are shut.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. But that's just the way it is.
What percentage of the Barnes-Hecker was actually mined out then?
Well, that's a good question. We'll never know. Because what they did was they had taken out the top, they put in 3 levels, level 1, level 2, level 3. But the ore body was going like this in a V shape. But as they also mine, they also do exploratory drilling, trying to find, does this ore body extend that way or this way, you know? And is there more ore here that could be mined? And what they found was that initially they thought, well, there's hardly any ore here at all. All there is this, we're going to take this out. And they had pretty much completed most of level 1. There was still work being done on the east end over by North Lake, but the west end was completely done. And then they started mining down, but what I read in the last reports, like in their last geological reports, was that their drilling showed that there was a lot more ore underneath that ore body. That they were actually, because otherwise they probably would have pulled out. But the drilling they were doing was promising that the ore body was bigger than what they thought. But they were going to have to go down deeper in order to mine that out. But it was never going to happen. So it's a good question.
I just wanted to bring up that in the article in the Marquette Monthly, Mather was the president of CCI at this time.
Yeah.
And Mather was the person that on the 4th of November said that, there was no liability.
No light-out, exactly.
No liability from the company.
Yeah.
So how did Mather get to have a high school name? And how did Mather get to have, this kind of founding father, where in fact he ran an operation?
Look at the history of all the people that belong here. Look at the history. Go back and look at the history of everybody that something's named after. Go back and take a look and see who are they really.
Okay, all right. Good.
And that's true.
So this leads up to my follow-up question.
Yeah. Okay.
This is the follow-up question. I'm from Republic. Great-grandfather was underground in Republic on November 3rd. I don't think his sons weren't old enough yet to go under, although they were old enough to go to World War II. I'm sure there was a discussion between Yolna and Fanny that night or the next day. Thank God you're here. Thank God that didn't happen. Why don't we in Republic maintain any of this memory?
Well, there is a good question, because I'm going to tell you something else. This is a different report investigation I did when I studied fatalities. Number 1 most dangerous mining area where men were killed, far outdistancing any other mine, even the Barnes-Hecker, was the Republic mines.
We don't talk about
Nobody they died by the dozens in their mines in Republic, and it was an absolute. Those weren't Cleveland Cliffs mines. It was an absolute slaughter. What was happening in Republic, and it's just incredible. Cause I put together a report on that in another talk that I do, and in fact I came to the Republic Historical Society and talked about this, and I said the same thing. I said, my wife's grandma, Finnish grandmother, was married. Her husband was her first husband, Freeman. Eagle Freeman was killed in the Republic mine. When her grandpa Cantala came from Finland, he didn't have a place to stay. What widows did was, when your husband got killed, you were screwed, and so they opened up their house to boarders. And so when Arthur came here with his brother from Finland, she opened up, Ali, what's her name? She opened up her house to boarders, and Arthur moved in, and they got married. So, but her first husband was killed in Republic. They were living in Republic. When my father-in-law went to school, Reno Cantla, when he started school, he grew up in the Black River country there. He couldn't speak English. He always laughs about that when he was 5 years old. He started at the Black River School. He says none of the kids could speak English. The teachers had to teach all of the Finnish kids how to speak English before they could even teach them. But that's part of the heritage of these areas, and again, it's related, you know, I can't believe that, I find it absolutely sickening to myself, and I'm not being political again, but to see that there's people in this area that are against immigration and such. They say, well, it's legal immigration. Well, I get that. There's illegal immigration, legal immigration. But don't just say anything about immigrants, because just about everybody in this area is descended from immigrants, only second and third generations back. And myself included, my wife included, and just about everybody I know from the guy in Ispring, and I'm saying this here in Marquette. And it sickens me when I see that. But go ahead.
I think we've time for a couple more
Yeah,
questions.
I'm
You
being
and
political now.
somebody back there.
I don't feel that strongly about it, you know, I just thought I'd bring it up.
I don't know if there's any way to check this out or not, but my memory ain't the best, and you gotta remember, my father was only 12 years old when his dad was killed in his mine.
Yeah.
That paper you were talking about signing
Yeah.
for the release, my dad used to talk about it, but you know, I gotta remember, he was young at the time, and I remember the stories he was telling me that they really wanted to go restart in that mine and remine it again, and that was the purpose of signing that paper away, and that's why my grandmother would not sign that.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any way to prove that.
Well, the thing is, CCI sold that property, that mine, to Inland Steel, who are interested in reopening it. And so there's some truth to that. But CCI, I mean, there was always that talk about, well, should we go back and go after that ore body? But the thing was, there was the Morris Lloyd mine was right next to it. And so they could almost essentially, I'm not sure how far over, but just from coming from the drift from the Morris Lloyd mine, they probably undermined that. I would have to guess, I could study the records there, because that mine was sitting right next to it. So there's probably a good chance that they actually went in there and mined the rest of it underneath that, which would have been safe. Because if you go down 2,000 feet as opposed to 200 feet, you know.
Somebody back there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Early on, he talked about having trouble finding miners to work there. Was that just because it was a wet mine?
There was a couple of reasons. One was because of its location, because it was, you know, it was out quite a ways. And so, but there were other mines in the areas that had it. But the biggest reason was because it was dangerous. And I got another report that if you were waiting 4 hours, the 6-hour talk, there was another good report on how a couple of the miners had quit that mine when those runs came in. They were experienced underground miners. And when those sand runs were coming from the surface down into the crosscuts that they were putting in, they said, oh boy, they got out of there and they left. And there was one of the miners in particular that left, and he actually went down to Detroit, got a job, and he just got out of mining completely. Went down and got working in the car factories. And he talks about how when he was coming off of work, and the paper boys go up there going, you know, extra, mine caves in the UPs, kills 50 miners. He says, I knew it was the Barnes-Hecker mine. He says, before I bought that paper, I knew it was going to be the Barnes-Hecker mine. He says, I quit that mine because of that.
Jim, are there any pictures anywhere in the archives that would show what that location was like for the people who lived there?
There are some. There are a lot of photos. A lot of our family photos. Well, one of the things that I was a part of was the co-chair of the Barnes-Hecker Mine Remembrance Committee for the 90th anniversary. And what we did was we went out to talk to the families. And Mary Tippett, whose grandfather was killed in that mine, and her great uncle was killed in that mine site. She was the other co-chair. And we reached out to family members who had photos. And a lot of photos have showed up. And I know Barry's putting together a book right now. And I think, and I'm not sure, but it's more on a personal basis. That, you know, she's going to be talking about, you know, about the families and stuff like that. And I would have to imagine, I've seen some of the photos that she has. And some of them I do have, because when I was on the Remembrance Committee, we shared them. So I do have, you know, I have the right to use
But they're
those.
not in the archives here.
No, they're not here in the archives. No, they're not in the archives, no. They're in personal collections.
The History Center might have, they have a good collection of photographs.
Those foundations that are by the county road out there,
Yeah.
are they part of the?
Yeah, the big cement foundation, the bigger, if you've ever been in there, it's a nice, actually pretty nice. It'd be great for a memorial. That's right. That was the machinery house, the hoisting house that went up, and that's the whole bottom part of that, you know, everything that could be robbed was robbed. Every brick, piece of wood, everything that could be taken from these mine sites, every piece of copper, wiring, everything's gone. So all that's left is things that couldn't be carried away. But that whole concrete foundation and floor is still in there. It's amazing when you go in there and you think about it. Then there's a few other foundations that are right on the roadway that appear there. And one of them was the dry, where they changed, and the other was an office. And then there was other buildings that were in the back. But I've identified, because I got a great picture from the Market Regional History Center that shows those buildings when they were using them. It's a great photo. I said, oh yeah, I know the Then I went and I saw the foundations, and it shows those foundations. It shows those buildings there.
And I think that's the last one, we gotta wrap it up.
So on your foundation, I was at the shaft just a few days ago.
Yeah.
And next to the shaft is this building that you're talking about.
Yeah.
But when you go under the viaduct, and you know, as you're heading north toward Gold Mine Lake, and you cut in on the old railroad grade, there's foundations in there too. Is that also part of the mine?
I'm not familiar
No,
with
there's-
what you're talking about, but I would say probably not, because it could be part of the housing that was there.
Okay.
Because there is the remains back in there of the Barnes-Hecker mine location where the miners live. And part of that is back in that area somewhere. I've never been to it.
Okay.
But it would be close to what you're talking about in that area. And there are the remains of numerous homes that were there. Of course, once the Barnes-Hecker mine caved in the ensuing years, that whole location was just deserted. All of the families that lived there, every family that lived there, their husbands worked in the mine, worked in the Barnes-Hecker.
So the shaft of the Barnes-Hecker, how far away was that from the Lloyd Morris shaft?
Well, probably, I would have to guess at least a mile, maybe
Okay.
more. It'd be to the east of that. And I got accurate maps. They got maps here that could show you exactly. They got great maps that show all the underground workings and how they're connected. The Morris, Lloyd, and again, I would tell you to do like what I did. Just go on their webpage.
So those two exits were the only two places that either the guys that were or gals that were working in the Lloyd Morris mine or the Barnes-Hecker could get out were those two shafts.
Yeah.
That's it.
That was it.
That's the way mines are designed, you go one way in, one way out.
Yeah. And one of the things that happened, just real quick, because of that, remember I said that like the third level that connected to the sixth level of the Morris Lloyd, in order to hit that drift at that level at the Morris Lloyd, they had to go down 200 feet on a 45-degree angle and then hit it. And plus you went from a trapdoor type thing where you crawled down this ladder that went down that far. And they think what happened was when the mine caved in, that actually plugged.
Yeah.
Because everything came down in, and so there was stumps and rocks and trees and everything else coming in. And at least five of the men that were falling from the Barnes-Hecker were like 1,000 feet down in that drift. They got blown right down there. That's the guy with no head and stuff. But then it stopped. If that hadn't plugged, that supposed escape route would have flooded the next mine.
I was reading that Elliot was actually at that mine the next day
Yeah.
and looked at that and saw the stumps and the sand.
Yes.
And probably the people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, well, let's